Staff weapons are a central part of the history of medieval weaponry. They played various roles throughout warfare and civilian life, and were a common sight throughout medieval and Renaissance Europe. Staff weapons have had a long and varied history, starting with the spear, one of the earliest weapons, which has been used since at least 200,000 years ago. The spear was used for hunting as well as for early warfare, and was one of the first human tools used exclusively for violence, unlike the knife and axe, which also had utilitarian purposes. By the Middle Ages, staff weapons had evolved into diverse and complex weapons of war, including the simple quarterstaff, the devastating halberd with its ability to cut, thrust, and pierce, and the poleaxe, featuring the powerful warhammer head. These staff weapons were used not only as weapons of war, but also for duels, and as well as for ceremony and display. It would not be uncommon to see soldiers standing guard with staff weapons, or in a parade or other event holding highly decorated ceremonial staff weapons. One of the best examples of ceremonial staff weapon use are the elite Swiss mercenaries, who were highly sought after as royal guards for numerous European courts. Today, the Pope still maintains a Swiss guard armed with ceremonial halberds. The many different kinds of staff weapons share certain features. Staff weapons are composed of several major parts, beginning with the wooden haft and the metallic head. The haft is the long wooden part of a staff weapon, comprising the majority of its length. For most staff weapons, the haft was typically around 8 feet, but some were no taller than a man, while the pike could be as long as 20 feet. The haft can be further divided into 3 areas. The butt, or the bottom of the haft, could be used to strike an opponent and was sometimes shod with an iron cap or spike. The mid-staff was the middle of the haft, between the wielder's hands, and could be used to block strikes. The forepart was the section of the haft closest to the head. The head of the staff weapon was its tip, and the main point of difference between the different kinds of staff weapons. Different staff weapons featured varying combinations of spikes, blades, or hammerheads. The head would have a socket for the haft, and eyes, holes in the head that were used to secure it in place. Some also had languets, which were strips of metal that extended from the head down the haft. The languets were nailed in place to prevent the head from being chopped off in combat. Staff weapons were complex devices of war, and so too were the men who studied them and became masters of their use. Through their knowledge left behind in manuscripts, we can learn today how these historical figures used these beautiful yet brutal weapons. Compared to other medieval weapons, very little documentation of staff weapon use has been left behind, making the few masters who did write about them extremely important. Fiore de' Liberi, the earliest master to document the use of staff weapons, was an Italian fencing master who included a section on staff weapons in his 15th century treatise, The Flower of Battle. Nearly 200 years later, another Italian, Giacomo de' Grassi, included staff weapons in his book, Art of Defense, placing a great amount of emphasis on the value of thrusting attacks and the idea that the length of a weapon determines its use relative to other weapons. After Fiore, the next oldest medieval treatise on staff weapons is Le Jeu de la Hache, a Burgundian manuscript written by an unknown master detailing the use of the poleaxe in knightly combat. Most other sources on staff weapons come from Germany. One of the most important is Joachim Meyer, a major fencing master of the 1500s, who wrote on medieval weaponry as tools for sport as opposed to battlefield use. His well-illustrated, detailed treatise, The Art of Combat, includes sections on the use of quarterstaves, halberds, and pikes.